The Treatise of Wisdom, Part 1, The Scroll of Knowledge, by Edward Styler, Chapter 2. It was mid-morning when Firehand returned to his quarters. He had been busy since dawn getting people organized for the evening's events. He found Rain standing, motionless with her hands behind her back, observing the ghastly-looking fish slowly swimming up and down and around inside their 6-story aquarium. I had to design a special trap to catch those specimens. They reside in the deepest water and must remain under tremendous pressure in order to live. Quite frankly, it is beyond me how they escape being crushed, explained Firehand. They live in harmonious balance with their environment. They are at one with it. They realize this simple truth and do not fight it. They know that to rise to the surface means death, just as you know what would await you should you descend to their depths, she replied, still watching the fish. Their bodies were almost transparent. Their eyes were either huge or non-existent, and their mouths were extraordinarily large with long, needle-like teeth. How can a fish realize anything? Questioned Firehand after pondering her comment for a moment. Rain broke her statuesque poise to face him. The fish near her scattered at her motion. It seemed to Firehand that her eyes went from coal-black to blue. They may not frame their thoughts as we do, but they know that to leave their proper place is to feel discomfort. Now, she began, her voice becoming serious rather than mysterious. I must address the council today. Of course, we will meet promptly after lunch. I brought some fresh bread and smoked fish. We can eat here, amongst the flowers and the sunshine, said Firehand. He gestured toward a small table with a graceful flourish. I do believe, Firehand, that you wish to keep my company all to yourself. Nothing escapes your eyes, Firehand replied with a smile. I was hoping to speak with you of your travels, where you've been, what you've seen. The two of them talked at length over their meal. The warm air was sweeter than the night before, as the bright sun streamed into the room, opening flowers of every color and size imaginable. He is walking and floating toward a man he does not recognize, though he feels they know each other quite well. The man holds up a painting for him to look at. In the picture, a dark, deep blue ocean spreads out to infinity. He dives into the painting and follows the water deep, deep down, ever down, into the heart of the world. Endless streams of gold fish, haloed in a fuzzy glow, swim in lines in every direction, crisscrossing and emerging and diverging in an all-encompassing cycle. He knows this to be the lifeblood of the living world, the entity made of the essence of all life. This knowledge so startles him that the scene fades into another dream. He searches for the painting, but he can only find pictures of his childhood. He awoke with the dream at the forefront of his mind, as vivid as any memory. He stared up at the ceiling as he reviewed it, but it slowly faded as the murmur of reality filled his senses. He rose from bed and put on his everyday clothes. He took a few biscuits from the table and headed out. He figured it was probably around noon. People were carrying small parcels from the food share, a square of awned tables in the center of the outdoor common area. Moss picked up a ripe plum for himself as he passed and pressed his teeth into its sweet flesh. He was making his way to the bathhouse. His watch began at midnight, and that left time to attend the beginning of the feast. A wide set of stone stairs made a gentle curve down under the fortress. The air became pungent with the vapors emanating from the water in the bathhouse. The stairs led underground into a stone corridor with an arched ceiling. Glass globes containing glowing snails marked the way with a soft blue light. After another set of stairs, he came to a large pair of wooden doors, through which he stepped into the hot, purifying air of the bathhouse. He left his clothes in the dressing area and took a robe from a shelf, loosely tying it around his waist. The bathhouse was rather crowded due to the upcoming feast. Through the thick steam, he saw a friend of his and walked across the room to sit beside her. She moved over to make room on the crowded tier and briefly smiled at him as he came over. She was foreign to Highland, but she never said where she had come from, nor could he figure out what her name, Amelith, meant. She had first appeared in Fjord Harbor's Eye when she was 14 years of age, but the circumstances of her arrival were never spoken of by her, nor by the council which had accepted her. She was a solitary person, but quite pleasant, and she and he got on well together. "I hear you were on Gate Tower when rain came," she said as Moss sat down. "Yes. I don't know how she travels as she does without any supplies. She doesn't even have a guard." He eased back, letting the hot steam work into his flesh. "I'm sure she has her ways." Amelith's tanned skin was beaded with sweat. "Are you able to go to the feast tonight?" "I'll be there for a while at the beginning. I have watch at midnight. What did the hunting party bring back?" he asked. Hunting of wild game and its subsequent butchery was one of Amelith's primary duties. "Some stag, wild boar, and ducks. We could barely carry all the ducks. They kept falling off the wagons. The dogs ended up walking behind them and caught the ducks each time they hit a bump. It took all morning to dress it all. They sat in silence in the heat after that. Families were coming and going. People talked excitedly about the evening, what they would wear, what they expected Rain to talk about, and the like. Moss was simply dripping with sweat. The bathhouse was one of his favorite places to be. There was usually an interesting conversation going on, as it was the usual gathering place of philosophers and returned travelers. The talk wasn't particularly interesting that day, though, so he closed his eyes and hovered at the edge of consciousness. After a time, he vaguely heard Amelith say that she would see him later that evening. Through sleepy eyes, he saw her going. She almost had the body of a small man, Moss mused. She was tight with muscle, though. Moss had always admired her for that. The council was already present when Rain and Firehand arrived at the council chambers. The 6 seated councillors simultaneously rose when they saw Rain. She stood before them and gave a slight bow of her head. "Thank you for this meeting, and your ever-open ears," she said ceremoniously. "Thank you for sharing your wisdom so generously," replied Sweetword, motioning toward an empty high-backed chair with his arm. Rain gracefully walked around the table, and as she sat, so did the chancellors. A cup of tea was poured and passed around the table for her. "Thank you." She gently blew on the steaming drink before taking a slow sip. She took a moment to gaze out at the clear turquoise sea stretching out to the horizon. The chancellors silently waited for her to begin talking, except for Fasthand, who hintingly cleared his throat, earning more than a few scowls as he did so. Rain seemed to take no notice, and had another sip of tea as she brought her gaze from the windows. "Now," she began, "the reason for my visit is quite simple, but, like a dewdrop falling in a pool, the effects will be widespread, for I bring a warning. And warnings, as they are, especially those involving nations, never have easy answers. The drops in the pool are many in this case, and are a sprinkle before the downpour, as this warning concerns all nations. You are about to face the most critical years in your history, and whatever the outcome in the end, your lives will not be as they have been. Now is the time for wisdom, for you will be treading a precarious path. One route may lead to another set of problems, and another, but ultimately there will be but 2 destinations, life or death. I cannot tell you what problems you will face, nor the whole of the dangers which are rising, because they are elusive, wisps of inkling growing in the minds of all people. The dangers, which are tangible and present in this very room, grow from the very nature of people, specialization of knowledge, and the precedence of self. Remember that well, for no one person can conceive a solution that will benefit all, and for a person to save themselves, they must first save others. Now is the time for wisdom. Grave faces glanced around the room, searching perhaps for answers in each other's eyes, or comfort in seeing that one of them knew what was afoot. Firehand spoke up. "What are we to do then? How do we prepare for these dangers?" Rain looked at him. "These dangers have been building since the first people came to these lands, but so have your preparations for dealing with them. Look at your own people, at all people, see where their thoughts are, and dispel the war before it manifests." "From what front will the attack come?" asked Fasthand. "There will be no front. It will boil from within each nation, each person," said Rain. "Well, when can we expect it?" Fasthand asked. "It is already happening. It has always been happening. The time has simply come where you can no longer ignore it," said Rain. Firehand was getting agitated from all the ambiguity. "Ignore what? There's nothing happening on the scale you speak of. We have been at peace for decades. All rogue nations have been secured. The savages of the unclaimed lands are content to keep to themselves. If there is some secret uprising about to happen, we need to know who is responsible for it so that it may be quelled before it starts. There is nothing more I can tell you. The wheel is in motion. If your minds are open, you will know how to steer it." Rain then began untying a leather pouch from her belt. She opened the pouch wide and placed it on the table in front of her. It was full of small stones of all kinds. "These stones will shed some light into the future. Pass them round the table and pick out the one you are first drawn to." She passed the pouch to Life Touch on her right. He peered into the pouch, almost timidly, as if some heavy burden would result from this one choice. He then selected a smooth jade stone and passed the pouch to Firehand. Round the table it went, each chancellor gravely executing the small task. Soon they all had a stone on the table in front of them. The pouch was back in front of Rain. The chancellors sat with anxious expressions as Rain seemed to weigh the meaning of each stone in turn. She lingered longer on the sharp black flake in front of Fasthand. She stared hard into his eyes for a moment. Firehand noticed this and saw Rain's eyes go from brown to silver, as if trying to pierce Fasthand's soul. He could gain no insight into what she was seeing, but he felt that any man should crumble under such a stare. Fasthand, however, met her eyes without blinking or shying. In fact, Firehand even thought he saw a hint of a sly smile cross his face, but it evaporated as fast as it formed. An inkling of warning whispered through Firehand's mind. Rain, however, remained impassive and passed the pouch round again to collect the stones. "What did you see?" Firehand asked when she was tying the pouch back into her belt. "I saw the seeds of both hope and disaster. Remember, wisdom is a threefold path: knowledge, intelligence, open-mindedness. Very few people possess all three attributes, however a group of people will. Good afternoon, gentlemen. I must meditate in solitude." Rain left the glass room and its heavy atmosphere to the chancellors and their exasperated expressions. "For all their wisdom, you'd think the great mystics of the world would learn to speak clearly," grumbled Fasthand. Now, soothed Firehand, "we may consider ourselves lucky to have her on our side. At least we are forewarned." "Forewarned against what?" Fasthand's voice was rising. "Some mysterious war being waged at this very moment in some intangible plane. It seems Farsight was right. Times of peace give our enemies a chance to scheme and plot while we grow oblivious in our luxury. We must mobilize the army at once and begin our real combat training plan. If we are about to face Highland's most dire conflict, we will need battle-hardened soldiers. That is the kind of narrow-mindedness that would be the bane of Highland, said Lifetouch, as he pointed a hard finger at Fasthand. Rain made it quite clear this matter was to be dealt with using wisdom, not brute force. Ergo, an army will not be needed. Furthermore, we have no idea in who or where the danger lies. It would be utter foolishness to prompt even more conflict. You live in a dream world. Fasthand's anger was beginning to rise. Every enemy we have, or could have, has an army at their fingertips. Shall we just sit here and hope they don't use them? Lifetouch remained calm. No, we take measures to ensure that they don't use them, and that involves refraining from any actions which would guarantee military retaliation. The other chancellors' heads went to and fro as the two of them exchanged words. Feather spoke up. I am inclined to agree with Lifetouch, he said, leaning back in his carved chair thoughtfully. Fasthand glared at him. That is, before the army is used rashly, we must first get to the root of whatever problem it is we face. That means using intelligence to gain knowledge that we can act upon with an open mind. Is that not what Rain suggested? What manner of intelligence do you propose? Asked Fasthand, his face turning back to its normal color. The very same that you already employ when preparing for battle. You gain information through spies and the like. The catch, however, is that in battle you have the luxury of knowing who the enemy is. We don't appear to have that luxury now. In the world of trade we have a saying, the seasons bring the winds of trade, but also bring the winds of change, meaning that us traders must be aware at all times not just of what trade items are coveted now, but also of what will be desired in the future. This requires intimate knowledge of everyone's wishes, from the peasant to the emperor. It also requires at times for those wishes to be shaped. The point, gentlemen, is that with the proper means of gathering information, the thoughts of all people may be both read and directed. It requires subtlety on a worldly scale. It requires employing huge numbers of people without knowing they are being employed. You mean to fight an intangible war with an intangible army? Firehand stroked his beard thoughtfully. Tell us, what methods do the traders use?